What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be covering a little bit more of a budget-focused Shaddoll deck. I know that it can be a little bit discouraging that the invoked engine is so expensive right now, but I want you guys to know that Shaddolls, even without the invoked cards, can still do a ton of stuff on their own. They're a little bit less consistent because Invocation adds those additional copies of Polymerization that really helps this deck get off the ground, but we're playing some cards to kind of mitigate that. And I want you guys to know that even though this deck is budget friendly, it's still very, very powerful. Like, you can still take games very easily. The Shaddoll cards float like crazy. They're really hard to deal with. Winda plus like other cards are still like incredibly hard to deal with, especially when they're floating back cards on the next turn that allow you to go and extend even farther. So overall, let's just jump into it. Starting off, we are playing 3 copies of all of the consistency Shaddolls. 3 Wendy, 3 Squamata, 3 Hedgehog, and 3 Beast. All these cards, if you see them with Poly, help you get off the ground, help you get your floating started, help you get like your plays going for your follow-up turns. The weakest one here is probably the 3 of Dragon, but Dragon is so good being able to set on your opponent's turn off of your Wendy effect that it warrants its spot at 3, especially as you'll see it later in the deck. We play some Allures of Darkness in here, so we want to keep our dark count high. And for that, we're maxing out on our consistency enabler Shaddolls. All these cards are really good. Any of these paired with a fusion spell allows you to pop off relatively well, set up a strong board that's going to allow you to recur resources and stop your opponent at least a little bit from playing, and then give you some advantage that you can work with on your next turn. Overall, all these cards are really fantastic. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with them. And for the rest of the Shaddolls, we have 2 copies of Dragon, 1 Falco, and 1 Aerial. So we're playing 2 Dragon because there's a lot of matchups where like having the Dragon is kind of important, like just to being able to clear all of your opponent's back row. You can eat through your opponent's back row relatively easily with this deck because it gains a lot of advantage. It's a lot of hard stuff to stop, not a lot of like floodgates or like cards really stop this deck all that much. Like, to your opponent judgments your Shaddoll fusion, and you have another one, you can still just pop off just as hard. So in that regard, it's kind of hard on what to hit with this deck, but there is matchups where Dragon's very important. Playing the 1 of Falco to recur our advantage, and for him to just be a floating body every single turn. Overall, he makes it into this deck because we want to keep our dark count high, and as a 1 of in a pure Shaddoll deck, I think the utility that he brings makes him warrant his spot. And the 1 Aerial, because this card's pretty nutty. There's a lot of really cool combos that you can do with this in the trap that allow you to make like really big boards. And then against certain matchups, you can like completely cripple your opponent's graveyard because you can just banish 3 cards. But at most stages of the game, it's relatively easy to get access to this card, so you only really need 1. Falco additionally can summon it back as well, so even if you've used it previously, this allows you to get some more reuse out of it. And then that's it for the Shaddolls. And as you guys saw, pretty high dark count. We have like 12 darks in here. That's just because we want to ensure that we always have a dark in hand that we can banish off of Allure of Darkness, because consistency is a big issue with the pure Shaddoll deck. You need to see a fusion spell in order to get off the ground. If you don't see one, life can be pretty difficult for you. But continuing on, our light engine that we play in the deck is, of course, 3 copies of Performage Damage Juggler, 1 copy of Performage Trick Clown, 1 copy of Performage Hat Tricker. All these cards are really fantastic. In testing, I've considered bumping this up to 2 because there's some hands where if you open like a handful of Shaddolls plus a Shaddoll fusion and then a Hat Tricker on top of it, you can actually do like your full play and then also end on a rank 4. Whether you want to play like an Emerald or something to cycle back your resources, a Tornado Dragon to pop back row for specific matchups. Me personally, I have a Dweller in here right now for like any of those any matchups like Spiral, where like a Winda plus Dweller is hard for them to play through because they're not going to be able to get any other graveyard effects during that turn, which allows you to like clap back and OTK them because they're not really going to be able to play a ton of defense. And then aside from that, Trick Clown or getting you dual usage is really strong. Summoning this back off a Cross Sheep is really good as well because it essentially allows you to Cross Sheep for 2 monsters, which is really good. Overall, this engine's really fantastic, and if you draw it in your opening hand, you can make some pretty good boards, even though you're only playing pure Shaddolls. Continuing on, we have our first major draw engine of the deck, our Spellbooks. So these are kind of the cards that I'm playing in place of like Mathematician. These three specifically is because this uses your normal summon. It gets the secrets out of the deck. Secrets get Spellbook of Knowledge. You knowledge, send this card to graveyard, draw 2. You've basically removed 4 cards from your deck so that you can increase the odds that you draw into your fusions by a lot. And another problem that I had with Mathematician is that like it sends your Shaddolls, which is cool, but we're playing such a high Shaddoll count that what we really need to see is a fusion spell to play the game, and this engine helps us do that, or helps us ensure that. Also, Spellbook of Knowledge is really strong with like any of your Shaddoll effects. Like you can normal summon Wendy, Spellbook of Knowledge it away, draw your, or actually not Wendy, I'm sorry, this is a psychic. Normal summon a Squamata, right? Spellbook of Knowledge, send it to the graveyard. Squamata effects send the Wendy, and like that can get your play started in that way, and you've drawn 2 cards. So like there's a lot of ways that even if you don't see this card, this is just a raw +1, which is really strong, I think, especially since it gives you more opportunities to draw into your fusion spells. Next in the deck, the best consistency card, Allure of Darkness. Like I said, we have a high dark count in this deck because of this card. This allows you to dig pretty deep for your stuff. You see your fusion spells, which is like, I'm going to keep hammering it home because really the games that you can't win are ones where you don't see fusion. So this helps you get there, helps you draw through your stuff. Also, there's some really cool interactions with this where if you have like a bunch of spells and you want to allure to see draw into a better hand, or like you have no way to trigger Shaddolls but you want to draw into more stuff, you can actually allure. If you allure and you have like a Wendy in hand, you can discard the Wendy, and then this will get its effect because it was sent to the graveyard by a card effect. So you'll be able to set a monster from grave or from deck to get your play started. For example, like say in your hands all you have is like a bunch of spells, and then these 2 cards, or like things that don't really get you off the ground, and then these 2 cards you can allure. Both of these get sent to the graveyard, right? If you draw into a fusion, that's great because Wendy's going to set like a Squamata or a Shaddoll, and then Juggler's going to banish itself to search. So even in cases where you don't draw the darks, Allure of Darkness can be pretty beneficial for getting your play started. And then continuing on, we have our main Shaddoll cards in the deck. Now this is the bread and butter stuff. Never play anything less than 3 and 3 of each. I want to say that El Shaddoll is like almost better because of the fact that it allows you to trigger all of your Shaddoll effects during your opponent's turn. It being quick play is really huge, but I can't understate also how good Shaddoll Fusion is. I don't know, like some of you may have seen, there's actually a bunch of like 1-card OTKs with this card that allow you to make like 3 constructs in a turn and Boral Sword while clearing their cards, which is really strong. So both of these are like just really fantastic cards. Like I said, you have to see them to play the game. In some cases, like I've been considering testing just regular polymerization with a fusion recycling plant because it allows you to float your resources back while upping the amount of polymerizations you have in deck, which can be pretty beneficial. Also, there might be cases like, say if you have 1 copy of Invocation and 1 copy of the Alistair link, it might be beneficial to play both of those just at 1 with 3 Alistair, just because of like the amount of value that just having more access to polymerization gives you is actually pretty insane, especially since the Alistair cards are going to give you access to the Invoked Engine as well. But yeah, either way, max out on the polys because you need them to play the game. That's why we're playing 3 of them. That's why we're playing the draw spells as well, is so that we can see our polys as often as we can, or our fusion spells as often as we can. And then the last 3 fusion spells in the deck, 3 super polymerization. So this is really good because even if you don't really open anything, if you can like set a Shaddoll monster, set a super poly, sometimes that can be good enough because you can disrupt your opponent and make a strong like extra deck monster like a Shekanaga or a Winda, or even construct to get your plays, like dump your cards, get your play started for next turn. Overall, this is a great card going first because you can set it as interruption. It's a great card going second because it allows you to break boards pretty easily. Yeah, overall really strong. I think in this more budget build, you should definitely play these, especially since this came in the structure deck, so it's pretty available right now for everyone to get, especially if you're already playing this deck because you most likely got 3 structure decks. And then the last 2 cards in the deck, we have our 1 Race Shaddoll Incarnation. Ton of really cool plays that you can do with this card and Ariel, like I've shown before. Alternately, you could also play, if you wanted to, like a Shaddoll core to pair alongside with it, so you have like a lot of recursion through that card, but the card's kind of bricky. I don't like it too much. There is the argument that you can like dump it at any time to add it back, but like I just don't like the fact that it doesn't float as well as some of my other Shaddoll cards. If you're feeling like risky about it, you could probably cut one of these down to play the trap, but then you're like messing with your dark count, so you're less likely to see them for a Lure of Darkness. But overall, I think this is okay being the one trap that you play in your deck because of the sheer amount of combo potential that it gives your deck. And then the last card in the deck, one copy of Pot of Avarice. Against my better judgment, I put this in here mostly because like I was running out of Shaddoll cards and I wanted more Shaddoll cards, so I wanted to. I cut the Upstart Goblin for the Pot of Avarice. Arguably, this card is way more greedy, but just the fact that you can like recycle all of your cards and then draw 2 is just insane. Like the amount of draw power that this deck can generate, along with the amount of floating that it does, it's pretty easy sometimes to start your opponent's turn or like end your turn with like 2 or 3 cards left in hand, and then during your opponent's turn, trigger your Shaddoll effects, add cards. During your turn, activate a Pot of Avarice, draw 2, activate like a Spellbook of Knowledge on a Shaddoll card, triggering its effect, drawing 2 cards, and it's really easy to see how like you can start snowballing into like crazy amounts of advantage. And this allows you to like kind of recklessly burn through your extra deck cards and then put them back later. This is especially more relevant, I think, with like cards like Winda, if you're making like double Winda during the first turn, and then like if you need a second copy of like Al Capone or Apcolon, this allows you to put the first copy back and still use it again. But overall, that's it for the main deck. Continuing on to the extra deck, we have 3 copies of the Queen herself. This card is so good. Without this card, Shaddolls I don't think exist. Like Construct's insane. There's a lot of really cool combos that you can do with this card that use up 2 in a turn. There's OTKs that use up all 3 in the turn. So this card demands its spot at 3 in a pure Shaddoll list. When I took out the Invoke cards from the last time I was testing this deck, the first thing I did, snap, add this back to 3, because I was honestly, even in the Invoke deck, missing the 3rd copy of it sometimes. Continuing on with our other Shaddoll cards, we have 2 copies of Winda. This card's really good. It's your best stun card in the deck. No more than 2 is probably fine. You don't really need to go into it a lot post turn 2, turn 3. And there's ways to summon it back in the deck, especially like with cards like Falco. Falco can actually reset this card, which can be really cool. And then if you have the Shaddoll still in, you haven't used yet, you can flip this back up and then make it very difficult for your opponent to out. But there's a lot of other cards you want to play in the extra deck, and most games I don't think you'll go through 2, or you'll go through 2 but not necessarily 3. Continuing on, we have 1 copy of Apcolon and 1 copy of Shekanaga. Really, this could be like any of the Shaddoll fusions. It really depends on like how you're what you're personally playing at like your local scene, or like what you expect to be playing against. Like if you expect to be playing against more Salamangrate, this might be good as a Grista because it also stops like the summon. You can like super poly during your opponent's turn, and then also negate a summon. Shekanaga I like because there's plays that you can do on your first turn that make Shekanaga, which is pretty cool because like cards like Cross Sheep are a earth, and cards like Hat Tricker are earths, so we have access in main deck to make this. If you're playing Mathematicians, this card is especially good too because you can always Shaddoll fuse away the Mathman to make this. And then Apcolon is actually really cool. This card's pretty nuts. The fact that it allows you to just search out any card that you're missing is really, really good. Allows you to trigger Shaddoll effects as well because you discard after you search. The fact that you can El Shaddoll into this during your opponent's turn to like permanently negate something is really, really strong. And the fact that you can turn like you can use like a Wendy plus any Shaddoll to make a consistency card is really, really important. Like the Light Shaddoll that you could play to make Construct, it's kind of good. I'm not even fully sure what it does, to be honest, but I know it's kind of bricky. But this card's really fantastic because like even if you open up a handful of Shaddoll cards, right, you can still get off the ground because you can make this, search out like an El Shaddoll fusion, trigger all of your Shaddoll effects, make Cross Sheep, like do all your stuff that you need to do. So it's really good. It might even be worth playing just the second copy of Apcolon over the Shekanaga, just because it is such a strong card. And then for the last fusion in the deck, 1 copy of Starving Venom. This could be your super poly target of choice. Like you could be playing the Earth Adignister or this. This is especially good against Shaddolls right now because it basically turns off their entire board for free, which is really cool. Continuing on to the links, play 1 copy of Gravity Controller, because there's times where you want to just like clear your own window as the first action that you do of your turn without having to commit to a normal summon. You can't link with it, but that's fine. It also has additional utility in being able to clear extra deck cards in the extra monster zone, which is really strong as well. Yeah, overall worthy inclusion, especially since you're not playing the Alistair engine, so you don't have to play like the Almirage and the Secure Guard now. Next on to the Link 2s, we have 1 Cross Sheep, 1 Shaddoll Construct. Both these cards are pretty good. Where is that card? Both these cards are pretty good. The Shaddoll Cross Sheep is like your main card that you go through. Shaddoll Construct is really cool because once you get into circulation, it's really beneficial every turn. Allows you to trigger all of your Shaddoll effects and keep going. Both of these cards are pretty pivotal to some of the combos that pure Shaddoll has to go through as well. 1 Link 3, just the Nightmare Unicorn to outstuff. Use your Link 2s like Shaddoll Construct to link ladder into this, which is pretty strong. Or like if you have the Construct on the board, you can summon out the Nightmare next to it to get its like Shuffle Draw 1 effect, which is really strong. Overall, just some utility. Avramax, because it's like one of the main cards that we go into to protect our window, as well as Boral Sword Dragon, because this allows you to OTK, and also it protects window. Yeah, overall both these cards are pretty strong as the link cards in the deck. I don't think I would change either of these. It's pretty easy to link climb into a link 4 with this deck, especially if you have cards like El Shaddoll Construct, because you can like link it off into something else or fusion it off into something else and use its effect to summon it back out. So it's pretty easy to actually get into these cards. And then the last extra deck card in the deck is just 1 copy of Abyss Dweller, because there's some, like I said, there's certain plays where if you open the Hat Tricker, you can make it, if you know that against a certain matchup that Abyss Dweller is going to be more beneficial to make than anything else, like maybe a Draco example, or a match, for example, Winda doesn't really do anything against them, like it can be hard for them to out the Winda, but other than that, like the Abyss Dweller will go farther and making it so that your opponent can't actually break your board. Yeah, and so for that reason, I think this is a worthy inclusion as the 15th slot. With this deck in particular, since we're not playing a card like Instant Fusion, the extra deck space is a little bit easier to work with. You have a little more options. Like realistically, if you don't like the Dweller too much, you can switch it out for another Link monster. You don't like the Shekinage, you can switch it out for another like Winda, another Apcalone, or even another like Super Poly target. Like if you really wanted to play the Guard Dragon Fusion monster in the extra deck. Overall, I think this deck is really well situated, even though it is really like, it honestly is super budget, which is the most surprising part. Is I think that this deck has an insane amount of power for the amount of money that this deck actually costs to play. Like I think in the main deck, nothing itself is expensive at all. Most of it comes in the Shaddoll structure deck. The only cards that are kind of pricey in the extra deck are like, yeah, it's just like these 3 cards. But any deck you're playing is going to be playing a Boral Sword, so like this is worth picking up no matter what. Avramax is kind of pricey right now. It'll probably fall out a little bit, especially once it gets reprinted. And then Cross Sheep is mandatory. Like as much anything else you want to play in this deck, go for it. I don't think you can compromise on this card. This card is 100% worth its price tag, even if its price tag is like $10+. Just the amount of stuff that this allows you to do is pretty crazy. And even if you were only to take like 3 structure decks, plus like a Cross Sheep, I think that would be a relatively solid deck to take to locals, and that's only like $40 there. So no matter what, I think this deck has a lot of really cool budget options that you can play. Let me know what you guys are playing in your budget builds down below, or not even just budget builds, or like if you have any good tech for pure Shaddoll. I'm interested too, because I think this deck is really cool. And even though I showcased the Invoke cards, they're not actually mine. They're cards that my friends were letting me borrow for a few weeks to test with. And this has been Underclocked here. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.